Hi out there in Guitar Moderne land. I hope spring is springing where you are. It's starting to come to France, or at least the part of France we're in the south. When I first started Guitar Moderne, I would spend hours looking for guitarists that were doing something new on the instrument, something other than the standard blues and country and jazz that I loved, but that were experimenting with effects and a different way of playing. It took me hours to find stuff because there just wasn't much out there. Since then, and over a decade since then, my inbox fills up daily with people who are doing really interesting things in the genre. And thus, I sometimes forget things. That and being 100 years old means that I do forget things. And when a publicist approached me about Harry Christelis's new record, I had completely forgotten that I had already picked a record that he did, a beautiful duo record he did with Pedro Velasco, another guitarist, for a record picks. It ended up being actually a pick of the year once I revisited it after talking to him. But I had completely forgotten about it, and then I listened to the new record and was blown away, and decided to interview him. And then I went back and revisited the duo record as well. And I suggest you do all of the above because Christelis is a great guitarist from England who I guess you would call a grandson of Bill Frisell because he's about two generations down from when Bill changed the shape of guitar playing. He uses effects brilliantly, but very differently than Bill, and but he is of the same ilk in that he honors melody, he honors space, he has beautiful tone, and we talk about that, and we talk about a lot of other things. So, without further ado, I suggest you check out my interview with Harry Christelis. So, Harry, welcome to Guitar Moderne. When I got your record, your name didn't ring a bell right off, and then I put it into my Apple Tunes and saw
Mm.
that I had picked your record with Pedro Velasco
Okay.
for a record pick last year
Oh, amazing.
yeah, it was a terrific record, and I was really impressed. And it's just when I started covering this kind of modern guitar playing, there weren't that many players out there, and I could remember everything.
Mm.
Plus, I was 10 years younger. But uh, I apologize for not remembering, but I'm really glad I went back and started listening to that again because that's a beautiful record as well. How did that come together?
What the record with Pedro?
Yeah.
Um, it came about pretty. In fact, I mean, kind of both of these albums actually. That one and this newest one, they both came out quite spontaneously in a way. The one with Pedro, um, we, I mean, we met a few years before because he was the guy that fixes my guitars basically. And when I kind of took my guitar to him, we kind of discovered that we had incredibly like-minded love for a lot of the same music and kind of desires to kind of do the same thing. And then I think actually Pedro had a recording session booked with a trio of his. And then actually a few weeks before the recording, he kind of decided he didn't really want to do it with that trio. Didn't really know what to do with the recording session. Just called me and was like, "Do you want to come into the studio and we'll just try some stuff out and we'll record something?" So we did, and then that album just kind of came out like that, really. So I mean, I brought a bunch of tunes. Pedro brought a bunch of tunes, and yeah, it didn't go in there with too much of a plan, really. And yeah, kind of enjoying recording like that at the moment as well. I think the the less plan I have, I know of what I'm doing, then the less likely it is that I'll be disappointed by the outcome, if that makes sense.
The secret to happiness is lowered expectations.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And just
Of
being
course.
so yeah, it was quite a yeah, quite a spontaneous thing coming about that recording with Pedro.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've always found, I mean, I've worked in guitar repair shops over my course of my life, not repairing, but usually doing administrative work and basically keeping customers off the backs of the guys who were doing the repairing because they were, some of the top repairmen in the world. I was lucky enough to work with John Suhr in at Rudy's in New York, and with Gary Brower in San Francisco, who does Santana's guitar, Satriani's guitars. These guys are doing the biggest, so everybody wants to come. So they need somebody to be the bad guy and tell them no. You
Yeah.
can't do it for you tomorrow. He's working on John McLaughlin's guitar or something. But my experience has been that the best repairmen are good players. You
Oh
know,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
have you found that?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, like Pedro's been the only person I've been taking my guitars to for the last like 7 years or something like that. But I mean, he's yeah, phenomenal player as well. Great, really deep musician. But I mean, really applies his knowledge as a player onto how a guitar should play. At least for him, at least anyway. And so really understands that stuff. Um, I mean, to be honest, understands that stuff much better than I do. I mean, like I'm kind of one of those players that actually I just need my stuff to work. I'm not like the most knowledgeable of about guitars, to be honest, but that's kind of where Pedro completes me.
Exactly. Where are you based? Are you in London?
I'm in London, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So on your website, you mentioned Jacob Bro and Bill Frisell, the Beatles, Miles Davis, and Paul Motion as influences. But you also mentioned Talk Talk, which I found
Hmm.
interesting. And I'm assuming you mean like the Spirit of Eden era, not their synth pop era.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, like it actually wasn't too long ago. It's probably only within the last like 2 or 3 years that I discovered, yeah, Spirit of Eden and
Spring, something was it? Something spring.
yeah,
Colors of Spring, I want to say.
maybe, yeah. But yeah, it was those two albums that came out around that time, the two kind of late Talk Talk albums. And yeah, I mean, I discovered those and was quite shocked because I mean, I'd always thought of Talk Talk as something very different. And then I discovered those albums and they're like, oh, wow, that's incredible. So yeah, I think, I mean, I think when I was kind of trying to think of music that kind of influenced this album or just kind of me in general, I was just trying to think of things that I've been listening to a lot and had kind of really stuck in my mind. And yeah, those late Talk Talk things are definitely it's definitely something there that's kind of drawn me in for quite a few years.
There's also a Mark Hollis record, the singer guitar player. I don't know if you know
Mm.
that one, which is very much like those two as well. I have a friend in Leeds who turned me on to that. But I'm curious, what about that really kind of sparse, dark, minimalistic music? What was it that you feel inspires you?
Um, do you mean about that kind of those Talk Talk records or
Yeah,
about
yeah,
yeah, those Talk? Um, I think there's a kind of real sense of to me it feels like those records as soon as you put them on they really put you in a space and they really hold that space from beginning to end and there's kind of different energies within that and there's kind of a different movement in each track but it really holds a mood and um and it feels kind of very fluid and free flowing and I love the fact that even though you've got this kind of like lead vocalist, a lot of the time nothing really feels everything feels like it's always kind of intertwined. And even like Mark Hollis's vocals are quite abstract sounding to a certain extent. It's quite often I find it kind of hard to hear what his lyrics are really. It's this kind of thing that's kind of weaving in throughout. And I think those are two really important things for me in music. I really love listening to albums, and I think for me, a great album really sets up a space that then you kind of just enter that world for a little bit. In the same way that when you watch a film or you anything like that, it's nice when you kind of get taken into a world. And and yeah, I really like. I think with those Talk Talk albums, but also just a lot of those other influences that I was that you mentioned as well, I think there's something that ties them together, which feels, yeah, it feels like everyone's kind of taking a leading role at every moment almost, and there's never really, it's like the kind of the focus is of where your ears are being drawn to is kind of constantly shifting and constantly kind of, and it's feels like a really collective effort to bring about a sound.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, well, it's not the standard, the old school jazz, head solos, jazz soloist backed up by the rhythm section type thing, which has been a thing. I mean, ever since like when I lived in San Francisco in the 80s, early 90s, I mean, I saw that starting kind of there with some of the younger jazz players there, where the hierarchy was being blurred and it was more about collective improvisation rather than somebody taking a solo and the other people backing them up.
Mm.
Um, so I think that's been a thing in jazz for quite a while in a younger generation. And speaking of younger generations, it's interesting because I mean you mentioned Jacob Bro as an influence, and he's kind of first generation child of Bill Frisell, which would make
Mm.
you kind of a second generation child of
Yeah,
Bill
exactly.
Frisell. And
Grandchild.
what's that? Grandchild.
Grandchild.
Yes, exactly. And for good reason, obvious. I mean, Bill basically changed the face of jazz guitar. When he came on the scene. But and I love kind of some of the things that I hear that you took from him and the Paul Motion thing. But what do you think about what is it about Bill that has spoken to two generations of guitarists at this point?
I think, I mean, God, I think there's so many things. Um, I think he's another one that, coming back to what I was just saying about the other albums, I think there's a real strong sense in his music of everything that he does and that everything that he kind of brings out in musicians that he's playing with. He makes sure that everyone is really serving the present moment and what the music needs right then. It's not dictated, this is what's going to happen now, you're going to solo now, and then we're going to just work with that. It really feels like a much more kind of interactive and fluid approach to music, and with a real kind of lack of ego as well. I think because of that, it really feels like that he aims to kind of serve the higher purpose in a way of like what playing music and what creating a kind of piece of art is about. Um, and I think there's also just something so, and I think this is something I get drawn to with all, I mean, all art, like artists and all, to be honest, all people in general, actually. There's something deeply authentic about Bill Frisell. Like, and I think a lot of the time, people maybe think he's kind of completely original or he's kind of like very unique. And I don't know, I always find those words a little bit difficult because it's always coming from somewhere and you can hear loads of influences in his playing. So I don't know if I'd call it totally unique, but it's so authentic that you could just hear a note of him playing, could hear him play for 2 seconds and you know exactly who it is, because it's just, it feels like a real extension of him, of his mind and him speaking when I listen to him play. And there's other players that I think of like that as well, but for me that's the ultimate goal. um and yeah, and I think, like I said, I think that sort of, because of these his approaches, I think this kind of lack of ego that's in the music is such a refreshing thing, especially I think in the context of the jazz world, which I absolutely love, but also can be based around a lot of like egos flying around, you know, and a lot of people kind of like showing what they can do rather than rather than kind of being present and serving the music. Um,
Yeah. Well, yeah, it can easily, I mean, it often does descend into calisthenics and how did somebody put it? Parker licked diminished scale Coltrane like Parker licked diminished scale Coltrane like and things like that. And yes, that is something he brings. I mean, I think also, I mean, and I hear it in your music, and something else I want to discuss also is he came up in that generation, that golden era that was mind-boggling of him and Matheny and Schofield and Abercrombie and where they were children of the rock era, and you know they were the first. I think they were the first guitarists who um, made it okay to incorporate whatever music you liked into jazz. You know,
mm,
and he certainly does that, and you seem to do that, and the other people who seem to do that are Scandinavians. You know, and I hear that influence. You don't mention that, but I hear that. I don't know if it is an influence, but I hear that kind of attitude in your music, and you know, some of it, a lot of them recorded for ECM, and it has that kind of space and sound. But there's something about, I don't know. I just hear something about the fjords, something of the fjords in your music.
yeah.
Do you recognize that, or is that something you think
I mean,
about?
I do, funnily enough. So, I mean, I think there's definitely kind of like, there's a lot of like sort of like ECM music that I listen to. I've always been a really big fan of that label, and then a lot of artists that they're recording these days are coming from that sort of area of the world. It's funny, I mean, like actually over the past couple of years, I've actually never spent any time in Scandinavia before, and yet I mean, like Britain's not the easiest place to live in at the moment. Kind of like constantly shooting ourselves in the foot, it seems like over the last few years. But when I've been thinking about places that I would want to live and go, funnily enough, even though I've never been there, there's something that draws me towards a place like Copenhagen or something like that. Because I feel like, I feel like there's a real energy around this kind of music that I'm really interested in creating. There's a kind of sound world there that actually exists in a pretty strong way. Um, but yeah, I mean, I couldn't really say there's a huge like. I think it's don't know how much of a kind of direct influence it is, kind of with or where I can see the link. Basically, I can see the link between that music for sure.
Yeah, well, I
Yeah.
mean, it's some of my favorite music, and one of
Yeah.
the things I like about it and your music is, you know, there's no, it's not locked into a genre. It's not locked into a particular style. It's, you know, it's just as you were saying before, it's about just making music. It's not about, you know, what kind of music you're making or what genre of music you're making.
Mm.
And your music sounds like that to me. How did you start on guitar? When, and how?
Um, I started really young actually. I started when I was about 6 years old or something. Um, and I mean, no one in my family plays any instruments. Everyone's always been kind of really into music, and I was kind of brought up on lots of good music by my parents, but neither of them play at all. And I was actually very young, and I asked, I wanted, I think I saw in a toy shop, I wanted one of those like plastic guitars where you kind of press a button on the neck and it like makes a sound of a lick. And I really wanted that when I was a kid. And frustratingly to me at the time, my mum just bought me a real guitar and bought me a like kind of a very small real guitar, which I do remember being quite frustrated by. But I mean, yeah, I think it was probably the wiser of the choices. And I don't know, I just became really interested since then. I just haven't really stopped.
So when
Uh,
did you start lessons at an early age, or
I
learn
didn't.
yourself?
I was self-taught for quite a long time. On saying that, I mean, like some of my parents' friends, they would like be over at the house. There was always quite a lot of people hanging out at my family house. So when their friends would pull in and a couple of people know a chord or two or something like that, and they'd teach me something, and I'd go work on that, and then like maybe try and work some stuff out myself. Was learning lots of like songs by Oasis and people like that, and then another friend might come and show me a little kind of like the blues scale or something like that, and then I'd mess around with that for a while. Um, and I had a small run of lessons when I was a teenager, um, for a couple years, just at school. But yeah, the main time where I really kind of went into getting kind of like deeper into kind of like music education was when I ended up going to uni, actually. So I think that was the first time where I really kind of got a lot of formal training and kind of focus on music. So that was when I was like 22 or 23, I think I went there.
Did you go through a bebop phase and, learning that whole vocabulary and the harmony and all that kind of stuff?
I did, yeah. Um, I mean, funnily enough, it was like I remember. I'm sure a lot of people kind of have this sort of thing when they first start kind of going into learning jazz. Is I think when I like the first year of college, I used to have these like I set my guitar up, big old kind of Gretsch arch top with like 14 gauge flat wound strings and all these things because I was just like, this is what you got to do to sound like a jazz player, and it's got to be this kind of tone. You got to play like this, and I was trying to play with my thumb quite a lot and do the kind of Wes Montgomery thing, and I do love that stuff, but yeah, I think I always found it pretty difficult learning, and I mean, like all of that bebop stuff is it's such great music, and I still practice quite a bit of that stuff, and I practice bop tunes and kind of like lots of kind of like jazz language stuff, and I really enjoy playing that music. But yeah, I think once I started discovering people like Bill Frisell and started discovering that like, oh, actually, like all of your influences are relevant and you can bring everything to the table. It's not just about kind of learning lots of Parker licks or like kind of like bop language and just going that way. I think at that point, yeah, that's where I kind of discovered what like really spoke to me. I think I always found working on kind of like traditional like bop language and stuff like that quite difficult. But I think I found it difficult because I really love it, but it's not me, you know? It's like it doesn't yeah. And I think something like that, it almost becomes impossible to kind of master something when it doesn't speak to your own kind of vision of like creatively where you want to go.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, although that said, it's a terrific foundation for wherever you want to go.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, I think that's why I still work on that stuff
Yeah.
now, and I still listen to that music loads and I still love it, but like I think yeah, it's like it is an amazing foundation. And
Is
it's
there an
like
element
continue.
of, I was going to get into this later, but just in terms of trying to be a working musician anywhere, or especially someplace like London or New York, are there gigs playing that you would consider taking so that
Oh
you
yeah,
can
yeah, yeah.
promote?
I still do like a fair amount of gigs just in kind of bars and pubs and little jazz clubs and stuff like that, just playing those sorts of things, playing just standards basically.
Right.
And I really love those gigs actually. I really, really love those gigs. I think, I mean, there's so much music there that I really love. So much of that kind of jazz repertoire that I really love. And I think, yeah, it's a I find it really refreshing sometimes as well to, I love playing my own music and I love playing with my own groups and stuff like that. I love playing original music, but there's also something really joyous about playing music where there's less emotional weight to a certain extent on like the compositions and on the stuff. And it's basically just about going into a nice bar with a nice atmosphere and some great musicians and just seeing what happens. And the million different directions that you can take a standard that you've played thousands and thousands of times, and it could just kind of go anywhere. And yeah, I really love doing gigs like that still. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, it's brilliant. That's why they're standards. And people, there's so many, I always found it interesting that somebody like Jim Hall would keep recording the same tunes over and over again. And Bill has done that as well. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
if it's a good tune, it can go anywhere. You also choose some interesting guitars. I mean, I see them in the background and I've seen them in your videos. Which model Gibson is that?
That's a 125 TC.
Is it fully hollow?
Yes, yeah, it is. So that's from 1966. I bought that about 10 years ago or something like that. And yeah, for 10 years I didn't use anything else actually. I didn't touch another guitar. I'm not one of those guitarists that has loads and loads of instruments, and like I think I'm quite picky about like something. When it like feels right, then I'm like, okay, cool, I'm good. Like that's going to be my guitar for however long. And so I didn't use anything else for a really long time. I absolutely love that guitar. After about 10 years though, I still really like playing it, but it's not the most versatile of instruments. It's just, it kind of does one thing, and what it does spectacularly well. But it's pretty short neck. There's only one pickup. Feeds back like crazy, like to the point where actually I had to build F-hole plugs with a pair of flip-flops. So I just like when I did a gig, I would kind of wedge those in.
Is there stuffing a T-shirt or something in there as well?
No, it's actually, it was, yeah, me and a friend actually, I was looking because there was a company that was making F-hole plugs. And they were quite expensive. And then I looked on a forum and actually someone had just said the material that they're using is just standard flip-flops. So just get some of those, cut them out, and now they just like plug nicely in. But yeah, so then I was looking for I was starting to kind of think along the lines of a more kind of versatile guitar, something with a kind of couple different pickups, something wouldn't feed back so much, longer neck. And so the guitar that I've just started using recently, I just bought not too long ago, is that Hofner in the background. That's what I've been using kind of pretty solidly, pretty exclusively for the last like year or so. And actually I bought that from Pedro. Pedro's the opposite. He has a ridiculous amount of guitars. Like he's kind of a bit of an obsessive and can't stop. But I always really loved that instrument of his. And he always really loved it as well, but he basically just said the body was just a bit too big for him, kind of put his arm up and he just wanted something smaller. So couldn't really, yeah, like I said, I can be quite picky. So I think when I come across an instrument that like I really love, it doesn't happen often. So when it does, I have to have it. And I think the only two instruments I've really had that with over the past few years are those two. Well, there's one other I can think of, but I'll never be able to afford it. So.
Well, you do own a telly also, I noticed in the video with the singer.
I do, yeah. I want to love it, but I don't. I think it's it's like, I mean, I think I've always really wanted a great Telecaster, but the neck feels horrible on mine. I don't really like I think I basically, at some point in my life, probably the next guitar that I own, whenever that will be, is I think I'm probably gonna custom build a Telecaster, or maybe get Pedro to help me custom build a Telecaster, basically.
Right.
Um, I love the guitars, but I think a lot of the kind of standard Telecasters, the necks feel kind of like too odd and kind of too chunky to me, and there's something that just doesn't really sit with me. I've had that Telecaster actually for a really long time, probably about 20 years, and I've been over that 20 years. There's been multiple times when I've taken it to people to like try and tweak things and get it to how I wanted it, and it's just never really worked for me. Never felt comfortable.
Yeah, well, guitars can be like that. I mean, I mean, I found over the years, fortunately, I learned that you pick it up, and if it doesn't feel right away, give up. You know, if it doesn't feel and
Yeah,
sound right acoustically right away, give up, because it's never going to be quite right. And you can
yeah.
put new pickups in it, you can do all the fret jobs you want. It's never going to be right.
Yeah.
But what amps do you tend to use? Is London another one of those towns where you have to use small amps when you go out and play, or you prefer to use small amps?
It's yeah. I mean, I don't use like enormous amps at the moment. I've been using um, a Henriksen jazz amp actually. Um,
Solid state?
yeah, yeah. In fact, both of the amps that I use are kind of solid state. Um, I've also got a Roland Jazz Chorus as well. But one of the smaller models, still kind of like stereo speakers, but one of the smaller models, not the kind of big 120.
Right.
Um, and actually, so on a fair amount of most of the time, actually, if I go to a gig and I'm just using one, I usually take the Henriksen. I really like. Um, for me, it's a kind of amp that if your instrument sounds good, if it's a good acoustic sounding instrument, like the amp will sound great. It will just bring out the kind of depth and the warmth of that instrument, and also kind of takes pedals and effects really, really well. It just feels really clean. So then I can manipulate the sound in a way that I want to, and it feels like it works with that really well.
Well,
Um,
perfect segue, because it's time to talk about the fact that one reason you have such a distinctive sound is you seem to master some of the newer pedal effects, the more glitchy pitch shifting ones, and can use them. It sounds almost like a fourth member of the trio, if you
hmm,
can put it like that, where you really integrate it beautifully. I mean, you use it very differently than, say, Bill uses loopers, or other people use freeze effects and things like that, although I think sometimes you use a breeze type effect. But which ones are you using, and how are you using them?
um, so there is a kind of freeze pedal on there, but it's a game changer plus pedal,
Uh,
which is basically, yeah, just like a freeze pedal, just a slightly kind of fancier freeze pedal where it just gives you a little bit more scope to do things with it. I really like with that pedal how you can kind of manipulate the kind of like attack and decay of the sound, the actual kind of sound of when it freezes. It's also got like a send and return, stuff like that. So I can kind of sculpt the sound. I've got like that freeze pedal running through being sent to an overdrive pedal. So I really like the fact that when I can kind of like hold a note on it, it takes on the sound of another instrument. It doesn't just sound like what I've done and then that kind of freezes. It sounds like then it kind of turns into a kind of slightly more distorted thing, and it separates my dry guitar sound with the sound of that effect going on, and yeah, gives a little bit, like you were saying, a bit of a like kind of another member to the group. It brings about a new sound. Um, so I've been using that quite a bit with kind of more glitchy sounds. there's a couple pedals I've been really enjoying using. One of them, which I've had for a while, is a DoD rubberneck analog delay, which I actually have on probably 95% of the time when I'm playing, in a slightly more subtle way. But then it's got some really nice features as well, where you can like double or half the time of the delay, just with the kind of click of your foot. So what that does is then the kind of like octave of what's being kind of delayed will kind of like jump up or jump down by an octave, as you're going. You can create some really, really nice effects with that. And then another one that I'm just kind of getting my head round, I bought it a few months ago, but I'm really, really enjoying, is the Count to 5.
Yeah.
Which is great. I mean, like, I think there's definitely more in it that I'm kind of discovering at the moment, but it's a kind of another one where it reminds me a little bit actually of that kind of sampler that Bill used to use a lot during the kind of 80s and 90s. I'm trying to remember what it's called now. I know what it looks like. It's that, like,
You mean
little...
when he wasn't using the line 6, when he went to a DoD delay at one point also.
Yeah, it was before that. It's quite early in the kind of like this, the more like kind of the like...
Oh, the 16-second digital, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Ultra harmonics.
Yeah, I absolutely love that pedal, and I love that sort of thing. And I think this Count to 5 is, it's quite a different sound, but it's kind of getting into that. I like it when things that act as kind of like delays and samplers. It's interesting for me when they kind of take on their own life, that to a certain extent I might have an intention with what I'm trying to do with the sound, and also there's a slight acceptance that I have to have of like the pedal is just also going to do its thing, and something might come out, and then I've got to kind of work with that and where it's going. And I like that, you know, it brings about, I think it kind of suits the air of like openness and spontaneity that I kind of want with the music anyway. So again, yeah, like you were saying, it's kind of another member of the group that then brings its own thing to the situation, and then it's something you got to deal with.
Yeah, it's like improvising with another musician, you know, in that respect, through the randomness. I mean, Henry Kaiser used to do that with a lexicon he had set up with some sort of, it was a delay looper, but it had some sort of randomized LFO that would do that, and you can do it. Yeah, there's a bunch of pedals out there that do stuff like that, like the Red Panda Tensor and a bunch of other ones. But yeah, especially for improvisatory music, it allows you to throw a monkey, you know, a spanner in the works, I think, as you say in
Yeah.
and yeah, then you got to respond to it, and that's what, you know, improvising with other people is all about.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you have a pedal board set up, or do you just bring them and daisy?
I do. I actually have an embarrassingly large pedal board. I say embarrassingly large because, like, I hate having to. I always feel a bit silly, like turning up with what looks like a surfboard across my shoulder. A small surfboard, but
Right.
still, it's quite big. But I think one of my things about using, I really like the sound of like the solid state amps that I use and the guitars that I use and pedals that I use, but I quite like everything to kind of just, I don't like to think about my gear too much in a way. I like things to just be set up and they work in the way that I like them. And so I bought a pretty big pedal board because I just wanted everything, including kind of the volume pedals and the plus pedal and stuff like that, everything to just be able to fit on one board. So it's just like, that's the setup. I can just plug it in and it's kind of good to go. Because I used to tweak things for each gig and then I'd kind of plug everything in. I get really bored with that, and I don't really like to switch things around too much. So everything can just fit on one ginormous board now, basically.
Well, besides the DoD and the and the game changer and a volume pedal. I assume there's a tuner on there probably. And
There's a tuner on there, and then I've got a boost and an overdrive pedal in one, which is actually something that Pedro built for me. It's one of his other many skills. He builds great pedals. He's got a little company called 12 Tone Box, and you can basically give him a shout and say kind of like, these are the kind of pedals that I'm interested in, or this is what I want to sound like this pedal, and then he builds them up for you, and they're really, really great. So it's kind of going through that and then into a little bit crusher, one of those Mua pedals, which are great actually. I really, really like it. I mean, it's the cheapest thing on my board. I bought it for 30 quid. And I mean, it makes some pretty kind of gnarly sounds and some pretty weird stuff. But I mean, the way it interacts with some of the other kind of like the analog delay and stuff like that, once you get it fit in, like get them interacting in the right way, sounds amazing. It's got those two. Then it's going through a volume pedal, then into the kind of game changer. Then it goes into the two delays, the counter 5 and the DOD. And then I've got a third delay pedal, which is just one of the electro harmonics, no, TC electronic flashback delays, which are kind of using just for a little bit of kind of like added atmospheric delay. And then out to a reverb pedal and a loop pedal at the end.
what are you using for looping?
I'm just using the Electro Harmonix 720 looper, which is kind of fairly simple, but it works great for what I need it for, actually. I mean, I'm using it less these days because the counter 5, with how it kind of samples things and then kind of throws stuff back to you, almost starts working as a looper itself. So I'm using it a little bit less, but it's still sometimes nice to be able to kind of do things on the counter 5 and the other pedals and record it into the actual looper. But yeah, I think for what I use it for, it works great, because a lot of what I use loop pedals for is creating kind of fairly ambient loops. So yeah, I don't really need a huge amount of accuracy with my loop pedals, or like to be able to store lots of things, or to be able to, I just need to be able to kind of capture kind of like an atmospheric sound world for a bit and then just let that go.
All right. Yeah, well, timed loops can be problematic when you're playing with other people anyway.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, exactly.
good to keep it vague.
Exactly.
You know, the British jazz scene has come way up in the last couple of years. It's become something of a force, I think, in the jazz world. And how has that affected your career and your music, and what have you felt the effects of that in living in London?
Yeah, I have. I mean, like it's really good to see. I mean, there's a real kind of like it definitely feels like there's quite a buzz around jazz in the UK at the moment, and there are so many excellent players doing incredible things, and it feels like a very wide scope. There's a lot of people like approaching music in very different ways, and it feels as kind of just as varied as the city is, really, as London is. It feels quite reflective of all the different people and all the different cultures that are here. I think in terms of how it's affected my work, interestingly enough, I think even though you can kind of feel this buzz around jazz in the UK, I still think that the music that I make, there's probably slightly less of a strong scene for it. I think a lot of the stuff that's got quite big on the UK jazz scene, is kind of maybe slightly less abstract, and yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think.
Well, the sense I get is it's a lot more, well, or a lot of it is Afrocentric and a lot of
Mm,
more rhythm based and kind of coming out of that. I mean, I confess I haven't, heard that much of it, but I'm more just aware of the gestalt that's happening. And your music, for want of a better word, feels more European in a way,
mm,
than British in
yeah.
that sense. Have you toured Europe? Have you been able to play over there?
No, not really, actually. I think, yeah, I've just been kind of playing around the UK at the moment. I would really, really like to kind of go and do some gigs in Europe. I think the music would work really well. I think it would. I think, like I was saying earlier, when I was kind of been slightly drawn towards places in Scandinavia, going and playing kind of Copenhagen and places like that. I'd really like to do that because I do get a sense that however much I really love London, I love the music scene here and I love playing here. Um, but I feel a little bit like I'm fighting against the tide a little bit with the music that I create. And I think in other places in Europe and in Scandinavia, I think there's probably a more kind of natural. Um, it has more of a kind of natural place, the music that I make. So yeah, hopefully some kind of tours around Europe and Scandinavia will be coming soon. I hope.
Great. Is the London scene big enough, I mean, for you to actually make a living just playing, or do you teach also?
Um, scrape by a living.
Just
But
playing.
I do teach as well, so I do a little bit of teaching and um, yeah, kind of like other bits and pieces. But yeah, I can just about scrape a living here. Um, but I mean, I could. It's yeah, London's not the most for all the great things about it and the music scene here and everything. I mean, it's not the easiest place to live at the moment. Does
Well,
feel
yeah.
like kind of there's a huge amount. I mean, I think like there's a lot of issues kind of around like in around lots of places in the world, but yeah, London and the UK, like I was saying at the beginning, feels like we've been kind of constantly shooting ourselves in the foot for the last like 5, 6 years, probably more actually. And so things are becoming very, very expensive, and I'm kind of still getting paid the same money for gigs that I was 10 years ago. So things are definitely becoming more of a squeeze, but just about managing to get by.
Yeah, well, almost thus it ever was. I mean, how do you make £1,000 as a jazz musician? You start with 2,000.
Yeah.
That's the old joke. And I mean, I don't imagine New York is a whole lot better.
Mm.
And America has, been shooting itself in the foot in every other organ and part of its anatomy for a while now. I mean, that's one reason I'm living in France now. My wife and I moved to France. So
Mm.
we got out. Haven't had a chance to examine the music scene here yet, but with the summer coming, there's apparently a lot of festivals, and um, we'll see what happens there.
Mm.
Recording wise, do you have something in the pipeline that you're working on for the next record, or?
Um, so I think, I mean, I did actually say to myself after I've kind of like gone through a like fairly dense period since COVID, um, of just putting out albums. I mean, it's like the third album in 3 years, um, which has been great. But I also did tell myself after this, I was like, okay, I probably need to like refocus things back on kind of like getting some better paid work again, because this has kind of just been like kind of more just like putting all of my resources and time and energy into these things. So I didn't have a huge amount of a plan for recording the next thing. On saying that, myself and Pedro, after we did, we put out that album Scribbling. We did a UK tour of that, and then since then, a lot of the gigs that we've been doing, we've introduced a incredible British drummer called Will Glazer. He started playing with us, and now we start doing stuff trio, 2 guitars and drums, and all the gigs have been really, really great. And so we've got another gig coming up soon, and we basically decided that we're gonna record the gig and maybe just record a live album. So I think it'll be quite a lot of the material off Scribbling, and hopefully a few new pieces as well. Maybe some stuff from this newest album that I've just put out, but we'll kind of reinterpret it in that trio setting. So I think, yeah, the next project, the next recording is probably going to be that trio, and then we'll just see how the gig goes, see if we end up getting a nice album out of it or not.
That sounds great. I'm curious how you reinterpret the music for that situation. How does adding the drums change the way you and Pedro interact, or what you feel you need to play or not play, or how does that work?
To be honest, I don't feel like it's changed things a huge amount. I think I always had an idea with that group, and I spoke to Pedro about it a while ago, that I wasn't even necessarily looking, I don't think we were, but I definitely wasn't necessarily looking for a drummer, that like, we need to find a drummer for this group. It needs to be, because it was working great as a duo, and I really enjoy playing stuff with just Pedro still. It was more that Will Glazer is the right person to bring into the situation, regardless of like whatever instrument that he would play. And he's I've been listening to him for a really long time. Always been really drawn towards his play. He's a real kind of like master of his instrument in a technical sense, but more than that, he's a very kind of like open, free-flowing player, like has a lot of the qualities of people like Joey Barron and Paul Motion and John Christensen, and people that I really love, and like a real impressionistic way of playing, and can really hear, really bring a very interactive and kind of conversational style of playing to the music. So I think in a way it didn't really feel like it changed things that much, because it actually, even the first gig that we played, we did get together to have one brief rehearsal, but even then we did our best to kind of not really tell him what to do too much. We're just like, look, we're just going to play, and then just do what you hear, and see where you kind of hear the space, and we'll just see how it works as a kind of 3-way conversation now, rather than just the two of us. And yeah, it just felt like it instantly clicked into place in a very natural way. So I guess things probably did need to change a little bit in terms of how me and Pedro were approaching the music. I guess how it comes out in terms of how we're playing it, but in terms of the actual approach of just being very open with it and just seeing what happens, it feels kind of the same in a way. And I think that is largely down to Will just being the right player for it. Yeah, the right sort of kind of impressionistic and very conversational player.
Yeah, that makes sense. I see you've got, is this an official record release thing you're doing at the Vortex Club, or?
Yes, yeah. So that will be the London kind of official launch show. So I mean, the album would have been out for a while, but yeah, it'll be nice to nice to go play it. I mean, we haven't played that much together as a quartet at all. I mean, like the second time we played one, we actually had so we had a trio gig, myself, Dave, and Andrea. And then I hadn't met Christos before, but I saw him playing on a different gig. And I went and met him afterwards and instantly just said to him after hearing him play, I was like, you should come play some of my music. I think he would sound great. I think I kind of instantly knew he would fit in really well. In the same way that I was talking about Will just now, I felt like it was someone could just hear how he kind of sits within a group and how he hears the space. And it speaks to what I want to do with music a lot. So I asked him to come join us on this gig that we did. And he came and joined us for the gig without us having a rehearsal and just see what happens. It was great. So then the next day I booked in the recording session. The next time we all saw each other was in the studio recording the album. And then since then we haven't, I think we've had one gig since then. And that was the only other time that we were all together in a room, all four of us. So I think the next time that we're all together in the room will be the time when we play the album launch at the Vortex, which is
April 4th, I want to say.
Yes, April 4th. Yeah.
I was looking to say, is there any way I could get up there to go see that? But we're still being real careful about COVID. I mean, I haven't been indoors to see a concert in 3 years, really.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, because I'm old as the hills, and my wife has some health issues that could be exacerbated, and we're being a little less careful now, but still, it just sounded so tempting. I mean, I love the Vortex Club, and when I was in London once, I saw Kit Downs and Seb Rochefort there as a duo.
Amazing.
And, yeah, absolutely amazing. And I guess they were two parts of the group with the guitarist you studied with, Chris Montague, wasn't one of the three of them?
Oh, yeah.
No, Kit and Chris were in Troika together, right?
Yeah.
And so,
have you listened to a little side note? Have you listened to Kit and Seb's newest album that they just put out?
Yeah, I think I did. I think somebody sent me a copy. Yeah, it's great. I mean, Seb is one of my favorite drummers.
Yeah.
Who's the British Andy, the British sax player? I'm spacing his last name. Plays with Ivan Arset and does ECM records. Andy Shepherd.
Yeah.
He's on one of the Andy Shepherd records as well. And I went back and checked out the Elephant. I think Elephant 9 or something. And they had that band, and yeah, he's a unique player.
Yeah, no, he's totally incredible. Really, really amazing. And actually, I think the same way about Kit, and so nice to hear that record they just put out together. It's like, yeah, it's really, really beautiful.
Great. Well, it's been great talking to you. Keep me posted. I hope you do that live record, because it sounds like it'll be a terrific record.
Yeah, no, I think it'll be nice. And no, it's really nice to speak to you too. Well, look, just on the off chance, like, doesn't sound like you would, but like on the off chance that you do end up being in London around April 4th, let me know and I'll stick you on the guest list for the night.
That sounds great. Stranger things have happened.
Yeah.
Have a good one.
You too. Nice to speak to you.
Bye.
Bye.